In just 46 seconds, one of Britain's most beloved actors went from relaxed guest to absolutely furious, tearing off his microphone and storming off the Loose Women set after what can only be described as one of the most disrespectful interviews in daytime television history. Denise Welch, known for her outspoken nature, pushed the legendary Michael Caine so far that he finally snapped, delivering a scathing takedown that left the entire studio in shocked silence before walking out and never looking back. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to this channel for daily videos exposing Britain's darkest scandals. Hit that bell icon so you never miss the drama. Last night's episode of Loose Women was meant to be a celebration. Michael Caine, the 88-year-old acting legend, was appearing to discuss his incredible 7-decade career in film. The panel seemed excited. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, and Caine himself walked onto the set with his trademark charm, waving to the crowd with that unmistakable Cockney warmth that has made him a national treasure. The other panelists greeted him with genuine affection. There were smiles, there was laughter, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly pleasant. Caine settled into his seat, adjusted his glasses, and began sharing stories about his early days in cinema. He talked about working with legendary directors, about the golden age of British film, and the audience hung on every word. But Denise Welch had other plans. While the other hosts were asking respectful questions about Caine's craft and his memorable roles, Welch sat there with a look that some viewers later described as almost predatory. She was waiting for her moment, and when it came, she wasted no time. "Michael," Welch interrupted, cutting off one of the other panelists mid-question, "I want to talk about something more current. There's been a lot of discussion lately about older actors and whether they should step aside for younger talent. You're 88 years old. Don't you think it's time you retired and let someone else have a go?" The studio went quiet. The other panelists exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even the audience seemed to shift uneasily in their seats. This wasn't the respectful tribute everyone had expected. This was something else entirely. Caine, to his credit, maintained his composure. He smiled, though anyone watching closely could see it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, Denise," he said slowly, his voice measured, "I think as long as directors want to hire me and audiences want to watch me, I'll keep working. Acting isn't about age. It's about whether you can still do the job." "But surely," Welch pressed on, leaning forward in her seat, "you must see how you're taking opportunities away from younger actors who are struggling to break through. Isn't that a bit selfish?" One of the other panelists tried to intervene, attempting to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But Welch talked right over her. She was locked onto Caine now, and she wasn't letting go. Caine's jaw tightened slightly. "I've never taken anything from anyone," he said, his voice a bit firmer now. "I've worked for everything I've got. Started with nothing, came from nothing. If younger actors want success, they need to work for it like I did." "That's easy to say when you're already at the top, isn't it?" Welch shot back. "When you've already had your success, made your millions. Some would say you're just hogging the spotlight now." The temperature in the studio was rising. You could feel it. The audience wasn't sure whether to gasp or applaud. The other panelists looked mortified. One of them tried again to change the subject, mentioning Caine's upcoming memoir. But Welch wasn't having it. No, I want to finish this point," Welch insisted, holding up a hand to silence her colleague. She turned back to Caine. "You see, Michael, I think there's a conversation we need to have about privilege and about men of your generation holding on to power and refusing to step aside gracefully." "Men of my generation?" Caine repeated, his eyebrows rising. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means exactly what I said," Welch continued, her voice taking on an edge. "Your generation had it easy. You got opportunities that people today can't even dream of. And now, you won't let go." Caine shifted in his seat, his famous cool beginning to crack. "Had it easy? I grew up in poverty in South London. My father was a fish market porter. We had nothing. I fought in Korea. I worked my arse off for 30 years before I got my first major role. Easy? You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, here we go," Welch said, rolling her eyes in a way that made several audience members gasp audibly. "The old, I had it tough routine. Michael, you're a wealthy white man who's had an incredible career. Maybe it's time to check your privilege and recognize that you've had advantages others haven't. The other panelists were trying desperately to salvage the situation now. One of them attempted to ask Caine about his favorite film role, but both Welch and Caine ignored her completely. They were locked in now, and this was heading somewhere dark. Privilege? Caine's voice was rising now, the legendary composure slipping. I'll tell you about privilege, shall I? Privilege is sitting here on a television show making a fortune for talking nonsense, then having the nerve to lecture someone who's actually worked for a living. Privilege is attacking guests on your show for no bloody reason other than to create drama. I'm not attacking you, Welch protested, though her smirk suggested otherwise. I'm asking legitimate questions about aging actors and representation in the industry. Bullshit, Caine snapped, and the audience gasped. He never swore in public. Never. This isn't about legitimate questions. This is about you trying to make yourself look good by tearing me down. It's cheap. It's nasty. And it's beneath you. Or at least, I thought it was. Welch's face flushed red. How dare you speak to me like that? This is my show. Then act like a professional host instead of a tabloid journalist. Caine fired back. I came here as a guest to talk about my work, my life, my career. Not to be ambushed with some agenda about age and privilege by someone who clearly has issues with successful people. The studio was in chaos now. The other panelists didn't know where to look. The producers were probably screaming in people's earpieces. The audience was dead silent, watching this legendary figure defend himself against an attack that had come completely out of nowhere. Welch wasn't backing down, though. If anything, she was doubling down. Issues with successful people, she laughed. But it was a harsh sound. No, Michael. Issues with arrogant people who think they're above criticism. You come on this show expecting everyone to bow down and worship you because you've made some films, but you're not special. You're just another actor who's past his prime and too proud to admit it. That was it. That was the moment. Everyone who watched this could pinpoint the exact second when Michael Caine decided he was done. His face went completely still. The anger that had been building there transformed into something colder, more controlled, and somehow more devastating. You know what, Denise? He said quietly, and the whole studio leaned in to hear him. I've been in this industry for 70 years. I've worked with the greatest directors, the finest actors, people with real talent and real class, and in all that time, I've done thousands of interviews. Good ones, bad ones, difficult ones, easy ones. But never, and I mean never, have I been treated with such disrespect as I have been here today. He reached up and began unclipping his microphone. What are you doing? Welch demanded. I'm leaving, Caine said simply. Because life is too short, and I'm too old to waste my time being insulted by someone who clearly invited me here just to attack me. You can't just leave in the middle of the show, Welch protested, looking genuinely shocked now that her ambush was backfiring spectacularly. Watch me, Caine replied. He stood up, his microphone pack now completely detached. You want to talk about privilege? Let me tell you something about real privilege. Real privilege is being able to walk away from people who treat you like garbage. Real privilege is knowing your worth and not letting anyone diminish it. And real privilege is having the self-respect to say, no, I don't have to sit here and take this. One of the other panelists tried to apologize, tried to get him to stay, but Caine, gently but firmly, shook his head. This isn't your fault, love, he said to her kindly. But I'm not staying on a show where the host thinks it's acceptable to ambush guests with personal attacks disguised as questions. Welch was scrambling now, realizing how bad this looked. Michael, please, sit down. Let's discuss this like adults. We could have discussed things like adults, Caine said, his voice sharp as a knife. If you'd treated me like an adult instead of a target. But you didn't. You decided to make this personal. You decided to be disrespectful. So now you can sit here and explain to your viewers why Michael Caine walked off your show. This is ridiculous, Welch sputtered. You're being oversensitive. It was just a conversation about the industry. Caine turned back to face her fully, and his expression was one of pure contempt. No, Denise. It was an attack. And a pathetic one at that. You invited me here under false pretenses, pretended to want to celebrate my career, and then launched into some agenda-driven rant about age and privilege. That's not journalism. That's not even entertainment. That's just mean-spirited garbage. The audience was completely transfixed. Some people were nodding along with Caine. Others looked uncomfortable. But everyone was watching, absolutely riveted by this complete destruction of what was supposed to be a feel-good interview. Welch tried one more time. If you walk off this show, everyone's going to think you can't handle tough questions. Caine actually laughed at that. It was a cold, brittle sound. Tough questions? Is that what you think those were? Darling, I've been interviewed by the toughest journalists in the world. I've faced real scrutiny about my work, my choices, my career. Those were tough questions. What you did was just rude. There's a difference. And if you can't see that, then you're not the professional you think you are. He straightened his jacket, tucked his microphone pack into his pocket, and looked out at the audience. I apologize to all of you for this, he said directly to them. You came here for entertainment, and instead you got, well, whatever this was. I hope the rest of your day is better than this nonsense. The audience actually applauded him. Denise Welch's face went even redder. Don't applaud him, she snapped at the audience. He's walking out on the show. But the applause only grew louder. People were standing up now. The other panelists looked like they wanted to sink through their chairs and disappear. Caine gave a small wave to the audience, that famous, charming smile back on his face, though his eyes were still hard. Then he turned and began walking toward the exit. This is unprofessional, Welch called after him, her voice shrill now. You can't just walk off. Caine stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one final time. I can and I am. And you know what the really sad thing is, Denise? You could have had a wonderful interview today. I've got stories that would have entertained your audience for hours. Stories about Hollywood, about the old days, about working with legends. But instead, you wanted to score cheap points and create drama. So congratulations, you got your drama. I hope it was worth it. We're going to commercial, someone shouted from off camera, probably a producer finally intervening. But Caine was already walking off. The cameras followed him as he strode across the studio floor, past shocked crew members, past gaping producers, heading straight for the exit. Welch was still talking, still trying to justify herself to the remaining panelists and the audience, but no one was listening. Everyone was watching Michael Caine, national treasure, legendary actor, walking away with his dignity intact while the show fell apart behind him. Good riddance, Welch finally shouted after him, and even her fellow panelists looked appalled at that. Caine didn't turn around, didn't react. He just kept walking, pushed open the studio door, and disappeared from view. The studio erupted. The audience was talking loudly, some defending Caine, others looking confused about what they'd just witnessed. The other panelists were trying to restore order, trying to salvage what was left of the show. But it was pointless. The show was over. The damage was done. One of the panelists turned to Welch and said, loud enough for the microphones to pick up, "What the hell was that, Denise? What were you thinking?" Welch tried to defend herself, saying she was just asking questions, just trying to have a real conversation, but nobody was buying it. Not the panelists, not the audience, not the crew who were shaking their heads in disbelief. The cameras finally cut away as Welch continued to argue with her colleagues, her voice rising in frustration as everyone told her she'd crossed a line. Behind her, on the big screen, they were still showing footage of Michael Caine walking out, and the image was perfect. A man who knew his worth refusing to be disrespected. In the corridor outside the studio, Caine was met by his assistant who had been waiting in the green room. According to people who were there, his first words were simply, "Get me out of here." He didn't rant, didn't rave, didn't complain. He just wanted to leave, to put distance between himself and what had just happened. A makeup artist who passed him in the corridor later told friends that Caine looked tired, disappointed, but not angry anymore. Just sad that what should have been a pleasant appearance had turned into such an ugly confrontation. Back in the studio, they were trying to continue the show, but it was hopeless. Welch was defensive and rattled. The other panelists were uncomfortable and kept making sympathetic comments about Caine. The audience was distracted, many of them checking their phones to see if videos of the confrontation were already online. Spoiler alert, they were. Within minutes, clips of Caine's takedown and dramatic exit were spreading across social media like wildfire. The segment that was supposed to last 20 minutes had been cut short at less than 10. and the remaining hour of the show limped along awkwardly. Every topic they tried to discuss kept coming back to what had happened with Caine. Viewers at home were flooding social media with reactions, and the overwhelming consensus was clear: Denise Welch had massively overstepped. Comments rolled in by the thousands. Absolutely disgusting how Denise treated Michael Caine. What was she thinking attacking a national treasure like that? Good for Michael Caine for walking out. Nobody should have to sit there and take that abuse. Denise Welch owes Michael Caine a massive apology. Even people who usually enjoyed Welch's outspoken style were shocked by how aggressive and disrespectful she'd been. This wasn't pushing boundaries or asking tough questions. This was a sustained attack on a guest who'd come in good faith to talk about his career. Industry insiders were equally appalled. Several prominent journalists and television personalities took to social media to condemn the interview. "This is not how you treat guests," one veteran broadcaster wrote. "Denise Welch crossed every line today. Absolutely shameful." But the most damning reactions came from Caine's colleagues and friends in the industry. While none of them gave official statements, several posted messages of support. One Oscar-winning actress simply posted a photo of herself with Caine and the caption, "A true gentleman and a legend." Another veteran British actor posted, "Some people are pure class, others just don't understand what that word means." The message was clear. The industry was rallying around Caine and distancing itself from what Welch had done. As the show finally, mercifully ended, Welch made one last attempt to justify her behavior. "We had a robust discussion," she told viewers. "Sometimes conversations get heated. That's what happens on live television." But her fellow panelists weren't letting her off that easily. One of them pointed out, quite correctly, that there's a difference between robust discussion and personal attacks. Another noted that you can ask difficult questions without being disrespectful. Welch tried to argue, but she was fighting a losing battle. The credits rolled, and the cameras cut away from a still arguing panel. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was reportedly tense and uncomfortable. Producers were in emergency meetings. Publicists were trying to get ahead of the story. And somewhere in all the chaos, people were asking the same question: what on earth had Denise Welch been thinking? Because whatever she'd been trying to achieve, all she'd actually accomplished was making herself look bad while making Michael Caine look even more dignified and professional than he already did. She'd picked a fight with a beloved icon and lost, spectacularly and publicly. The confrontation had been ugly, uncomfortable, and completely unnecessary. What should have been a celebration of an extraordinary career had turned into one of the most cringe-worthy moments in daytime television history. And all because one host decided that attacking her guest was somehow appropriate behavior. Michael Caine, meanwhile, had done exactly what he needed to do. He'd defended himself with class and precision, delivered a devastating critique of Welch's behavior, and walked away with his reputation not just intact, but enhanced. If anything, people loved him more after this than they had before, because he'd shown that even at 88, he wasn't going to let anyone treat him with disrespect. The image of him walking off that set, calm and dignified despite the chaos behind him, became instantly iconic. Here was a man who knew his worth, who understood that some battles are won by walking away, and who refused to participate in a circus designed to humiliate him. As the dust settled and people continued to dissect what had happened, one thing became crystal clear: Denise Welch had made a massive mistake. She'd attacked someone beloved. She'd done it in a way that came across as mean-spirited and agenda-driven, and she'd lost control of the situation completely when her target refused to play along. Michael Caine walked off that set, and in doing so, he showed everyone watching exactly what integrity looks like.